And welcome back. 14 minutes after the hour now, and a major assault against ISIS in Syria. The U.S.-led military coalition announced that airstrikes and coordinated attacks destroyed ISIS facilities and removed several hundred fighters from the battlefield. The news comes just days after President Trump ordered the withdrawal of American troops from Syria. Let's bring in Lieutenant Colonel Dakota Wood, Senior Research Fellow for Defense Programs at the Heritage Foundation. Colonel Wood, thanks for joining us today.
No, my pleasure. Thanks.
So I'm guessing this latest action probably leaves some people confused. The president had said we had defeated ISIS and that he was withdrawing as many as 2,000 troops. Now we're seeing airstrikes. Can you help us explain that?
Yeah, well, there's no contradiction. I mean, the U.S. will continue to have interests in the Middle East and take strikes as appropriate against entities like ISIS that threaten U.S. interests or prove to be a destabilizing force. But the president has talked about withdrawing the ground forces, the 2,000 or so troops that have been working with the Syrian democratic forces on the ground. So withdrawing ground forces is not the same thing as withdrawing from the region. And I think that's really the key point that needs to be made here.
And we know the attacks were carried out from December 16th through the 22nd in the Middle Euphrates River Valley, according to the news release from Operation Inherent Resolve, as this is called. What more can you tell us about how successful these airstrikes were and what they were intended to do?
Well, America's got a great precision strike capability. So as long as you can get a grid coordinate, then these bombs or missiles that are used, depending on the target being serviced, unerringly find their way to that target. So whether it's B-52s out of Al Udeid and Qatar or fighters out of Jordan, the munitions placed against the target are almost always very successful. So hitting command nodes, logistic and maintenance facilities that would support ISIS operations. Those are the types of things that really blunt the ability of the Islamic State to be effective at all. And we have to remember they used to control half of Syria and a third of Iraq, and all that's been taken away. So these are a few thousand fighters that are holding on, surrounded by enemies, and we really don't view them as being a significant threat to the United States in any way.
So there's been so much criticism against the president coming from both sides of the aisle about this withdrawal of troops. Should these airstrikes assuage people, and can we expect that these airstrikes will continue?
Oh, yes. I mean, we've got longstanding relationships in the region, whether it's Jordan or Israel or continuing to work with Saudi Arabia on various issues. Turkey is a NATO ally. They have given assurances that they're going to help contain the ISIS problem as well. But whether we continue to hold U.S. ground forces there in Syria when it's in such turmoil as an internal problem, I mean, really that's at the heart of the debate. You know, how long do you continue to be there? And the president's been frustrated by lack of clear answers on what's the theory of victory. I mean, conditions on the ground to drive these things, but what are those conditions? And with the SDF forces, holding their own, with Turkey having an interest in the region, we don't want to come into open confrontation with government of Syria forces. So he, as commander-in-chief of the military and as executive for the United States, has determined that the time for U.S. ground presence is at an end. But that certainly does not mean that we won't continue to prosecute targets that are aligned with our larger regional and strategic interests.
Okay, and you talk about our alliances in the region, and you mentioned Turkey as a NATO ally, but can we really rely on Turkey in that region to help defeat ISIS?
Oh, I think so. I mean, they have an enduring interest as well. So nobody wants a destabilizing entity like the Islamic State to hold terrain as they did in the past. I mean, nobody benefits from that. So Turkey has its own sovereign issues along its border, doesn't want the Islamic State problem falling over into it. They've got interests vis-a-vis Syria that are going on, and certainly with Iran and Iraq. So nobody wins if ISIS wins. And I think we can rely on folks in that region to take care of a domestic problem, an indigenous problem, something that's local to that area.
All right. Well, thank you so much for shedding light on that area for us. Lieutenant Colonel Dakota Wood, thanks for being with us this morning.
My pleasure.